Vietnam is determined to save the British pilot to avoid its first coronavirus death. They've had 0 deaths so far, and they're doing everything possible to keep it that way. They spent $200,000 in a country where the average salary is $150 a month, and if you have a high-paying job, a college-educated job, you get a $500 a month. He's very sick, obviously. He's on extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. This is when even a ventilator isn't enough to keep you alive. The lungs and the heart don't work, and we need a machine to replace their functions. This is dialysis, except on steroids. This is the bypass machine people who get open heart surgery are put on. He has been on this for a month, and they're looking for a lung transplant. They are literally doing everything possible to save his life. What more can you ask? But would we do this in the US? How much is his life worth? Well, we could talk about specifics first of all, starting with the legal system. $1.28 million in this wrongful death suit of a lady who died of cancer at the age of 34. This law firm gives out some figures. They're probably all good figures, shall we say, because they're trying to advertise. $4 million, $13.6 million, a pretty good range, right, for a death. But notice below they write factors that may reduce your wrongful death settlement. Oh, so it's not always the case. Is that right? What about something standardized? What about an average that they refuse to give here? Can we find such a figure? Well, if you want standard, look no further than the U.S. military. The U.S. military has a term called death gratuity. It's a one-time payment made to a surviving family to help them cope with the financial aspects of the death of a service member. How much do you think it is? $100,000. Does that seem low to you? Is it because when you sign up for the military you have a chance of dying and you know that already? You should have known this when you got into it? Or is it because most people, when they die in the military, it's not really publicized? Maybe some really famous soldier who's calling a political gambit would be worth more? If you want to talk about emotions in America, look no further than 9/11, the most significant event in U.S. history this century. There were many, many sources of money for this fund. $7 billion. That's a lot of money. And reportedly, each family received an average of over $2 million. But that's the U.S. where lives are valuable, right? That's what we think. What about other countries where they make less? Are people worth less? Do they get less of a payout? As you know, Boeing had 2 crashes with their 737 MAX plane, which was later found to be faulty. They made a payout of billions, but only a fraction of that went to the families, with each family receiving $145,000. Is that okay because they make less money in other countries? So you could pay them less? Is it because they aren't American? Well, as you've seen, payouts are all over the board. We need a way of quantifying this, calculating objectively how much a life is worth. In the medical field, we use a term called quality-adjusted life years. We calculate the effectiveness of a new intervention and compare it to how much it costs. So here, if you look on the graph, on the left side, there's health-related quality of life. On the right side, the x-axis is time in years. And so you do some calculation, and it makes a lot of sense, because you look at this little girl, and you think, wow, anybody would pay to save her life, and that's true. And we say that intuitively, but we also know that she's younger than her grandpa. She's probably in better health than her grandpa, and so she has more quality times years ahead of her. So her life, quote, should be worth more. And in the UK, they actually have an institute that calculates this to see if they could recommend it, if they could approve it for their National Health Service, which is their public health system. And their cutoff is £20,000, which in the olden days would have been $40,000. And just for comparison, in the US, we use 50 to 100,000. So we are willing, quote unquote, to pay much more for life in the US. But obviously there's modifying factors when you determine the value of life. The prior lady got 1.3 million, but this younger girl got much more. She went to the doctor when she was 19, said she had some bleeding from her behind, was told it was fine, and 4 years later got diagnosed with terminal cancer and died 2 years after that. She was young. Presumably she had a lot of life to live still, and that's why the payout was higher. Depends on your potential in life. But we also look at demographics. This is an economics comparison of people's compensation, how much they make. And we all knew this already, but white males make more than black males. Males make more than females. Your education level also matters to whether you make more or less. But you may think this is just economics. It's not relevant to the rest of life. Well, it is. In this pandemic, we saw that blacks are dying at much higher rates than whites. Why? Another factor is time. Apparently money runs out. The people who registered for their money sooner in the 9/11 fund, they got it. The people that didn't register until the last minute, well, unfortunately, they may only get half of what other people got. Maybe 30%? Money isn't unlimited. What do you see in this picture? What if I told you it's a refugee camp? How do you feel about this? How about now? These are two refugees, a mother and her daughter. You could feel their attention focused on you. You could experience the warmth of the smile of the baby. You feel something for them in your heart. You would be much more willing to donate to help them. But not in the last picture where you saw 100 faceless people somewhere on the other side of the world. Numbers do matter. When there are so many people, it is hard to remember that each one of them is human and valuable. When there are so many people dead, the value per person is decreased. So let's go back to Vietnam. Why would they spend $200,000 to try to save one person? Let's take a side and compare their circumstances to the USA. The gross domestic product is the amount of money a country makes in a year, all the people combined, and it's a good way to compare wealthiness. The US obviously has a lot more money, 100 times more basically. But also remember the population of Vietnam is 100 million while the US is 300 million. If you look here at money spent per person, Vietnam spent $200,000. If you use the same ratio compared to how much money they have, their wealthiness, then the US would have to spend something crazy like $17 million to try to save one person. Would we do that? Why is Vietnam doing this again? Well, if you look at the number of deaths, which is the third column over under here, total deaths, you see that there's a lot of deaths in many countries around the world. So let's look for Vietnam. Keep scrolling, keep scrolling, keep scrolling, keep scrolling. Okay, we're getting somewhere. Oh, wait, let's go back. Okay, British Virgin Islands, no, Vietnam. Okay, 0. 0 deaths. And they want to keep it that way. If you want to say that they're doing it just for pride, just to be able to say they did a good job, I'm fine with that. If you want to just save people's lives so you could boast about it, I'm all for that. What is this British Virgin Islands? Well, it's where Richard Branson lives on Necker Island. The population is 30,000 people. Maybe if it's a big party, it's more. But Vietnam's population is 100 million people, and nobody has died there yet. Now, if we go back to another source, the numbers are always off a little bit. Google lists the U.S. coronavirus deaths at 96,329. And if we do some math, some calculations, and we take this number and take the value of a life in the U.S., just like the military, at $100,000, which would probably be low for most of us, we multiply it by the number of lives lost, we would get $9.6 trillion. That's 9 zeros after it. More than any of us could count. Well, you might be telling me, put your money where your mouth is. I actually don't have very much money, but let's talk to somebody who does. Bill Gates is donating all his money to his foundation. And he's taking that foundation and setting it focused just on the coronavirus pandemic. He's definitely putting his money where his mouth is. He thinks it's a big deal. Should we too? Now that we know how we can value a human life, we've given some estimates and numbers. Let's take a look at how much money the US government has spent. There's all these news articles talking about how much money, what it means to national debt. $2.4 trillion. That's a lot of money. It is. Some bills are still in process. They may bump it up to $6 trillion. You bet that it's a lot of money. But the question comes back to, how much is a life in the U.S. worth? Do you think it's worth at least $100,000? Only you can respond how you feel about that. But if you believe that it's worth at least $100,000, then all the lives that have been lost during this pandemic combined are worth $9 trillion. Then we should do this and even more to stop this coronavirus pandemic, to prevent more people from dying.